Good evening, everyone. I'm Tony Segreto, and once again, so very honored to be your moderator for tonight's In the Know Town Hall. We want to thank you so much for joining us. Tonight, we're going to delve into an incredibly important topic that impacts so many of us: how to ensure a long and healthy life for survivors of cancer. Now, if you, a family member, or a friend have been through a battle with cancer, you know just how difficult that journey can be. From the moment of diagnosis through surgery and treatments, cancer takes a toll on all aspects of a patient's life and the family as well. I mean, after all, the family goes on that same journey. In fact, for some, it's a lifelong journey. Some treatments can have chronic side effects, and oftentimes survivors are left with unique medical and psychosocial needs even well after their primary treatment ends. Tonight, we're going to look at what's being done to help give patients back their lives through powerful, and I stress powerful, cancer prevention and survivorship programs. Thankfully, we have an incredible team, and there's another one, incredible, underline it 1,000 times, of physicians and researchers who are continually finding new ways to develop survivorship programs. Our experts tonight include Dr. Stephen D. Nimer, the director of Sylvester Comprehensive Cancer Center and the Oscar de la Renta Endowed Chair in Cancer Research. Dr. Erin Kobetz, who is the associate director of Population Sciences and Cancer Disparity at Sylvester. Dr. Frank Penedo, who is the director of the Cancer Survivorship Programs at Sylvester and a professor of psychology and medicine. And finally, Dr. Carmen Calfa, the medical director of the Cancer Survivorship Program and associate director of community outreach with the Breast Cancer Program at Sylvester in Plantation. It is truly a unique world-class group of experts. Now, before we get started, let's go over how you can participate in tonight's conversation. After Dr. Nimer and each of our experts have delivered opening remarks, the panelists will answer the questions that you've submitted over the last few days. You'll also, though, have the opportunity to submit questions during this program. For those of you who have been with us before, you know the drill. You may need a refresher course. For those of you who are new, pretty simple. At the bottom of your screen, there's a Q&A feature. That's where you will submit your questions. We want to tell those who are new, all the questions submitted will be anonymous, and we promise, we truly do promise, we're going to try to get as many of those questions in as we possibly can. But now, in order to get those questions in, let's start our program. It is my honor, it is my pleasure to introduce not only an amazing doctor and CEO and just an incredible man, but a dear friend, Dr. Stephen D. Nimer. Dr. Nimer, I know how busy you are. We're honored to have you, sir.
Good evening, Tony, and thank you, everybody, for joining us. I represent everyone at Sylvester, hundreds of faculty members and hundreds of dedicated staff working every day to keep our community safe and trying to find new treatments, new cures for cancer, even during this COVID pandemic. People have really stepped up in so many ways. It's been a very difficult time for our patients and their families, and just to deliver the quality of care that we're known for, the quality of care that we insist upon, has taken really a heroic effort from so many people. Tony, you talk about survivorship programs. We will go over these programs tonight. Let me say, first of all, these are not one-size-fits-all programs. We're very focused on each individual patient and their needs. We pride ourselves on having a very patient-centric cancer center. The research that we're doing in terms of cancer prevention, cancer survivorship are things you're going to hear about today. And it's a very timely topic. The treatments are so much better. People are living so much longer. That we now have over 16 million people in the United States that are either surviving with cancer who have been treated for cancer. And we're learning as these patients and people age that there are problems that we hadn't anticipated. And it's one thing to think that you know how to take care of everything that patients experience, but we're doing research. So even some of the things that we think may benefit patients may not benefit patients, and that's critical for our efforts here. You know, as we think about new treatments for cancer, the best way to eliminate a cancer is to prevent it from happening in the first place. Most of us know that cancers that are diagnosed early are often curable. Those that are diagnosed late are sometimes not curable. And with the COVID and people being afraid to seek medical care, our early detection efforts are really important. But we also have tremendous opportunities. There are cancers, plenty of cancers, that can actually be prevented. And to make sure that we focus on specific communities, whether it be smoking cessation or reducing obesity in our community. These are things that you're going to hear a lot more from others tonight. I'm really delighted that we have the opportunity to talk about our efforts to help the community. You know, we are the only NCI designated cancer center in South Florida, which means that we have access to treatments and protocols that are only available at very few cancer centers in the United States. And also that the funds that we get from the federal government, we have to invest them wisely and tell the federal government exactly about our research progress, some of which we'll share with you tonight. So we have with us Dr. Erin Kobetz, Dr. Frank Penedo, Dr. Carmen Calfa, who are all truly experts, nationally known for their work in this area. And I'm going to stop talking and turn it over to them and perhaps answer a question or two later. Thank you, Tony.
Thank you, Dr. Nimer. Dr. Kobetz, would you like to deliver some opening remarks?
Good evening, everyone. It's always a privilege to be with you and to share the work that we do at Sylvester, not only to care for those who are living with cancer and their families, but also to ensure that we can keep our communities healthy. Am I showing slides now? Thank you. Okay. So I wanted to take a few moments to share some slides with you to help orient you to the work that Sylvester does in cancer prevention. I'm often asked why a cancer center focuses on prevention. And at Sylvester, our mission is to reduce the burden of cancer in South Florida and the world. And part of reducing that burden means focusing on prevention. At our cancer center, we take a cells to community approach because we recognize that the etiology or development of cancer is extraordinarily complex. All of the work that we do is grounded in input from our community and our patients, and we work collaboratively with the diverse group of patient and community stakeholders to help inform our conceptualization of the type of research questions that have relevance in South Florida. South Florida is characterized by a unique cancer burden, some of which is reflected here on this slide. And in South Florida, we see a higher burden of cervical cancer, prostate cancer, melanoma. Some of this disease burden varies within and between different population subgroups. And all of the work that we do within the space of cancer prevention is oriented to understanding those differences and what we can do about it. South Florida is arguably the future demographic of the United States. So the work that we do at Sylvester in prevention and also in survivorship allows us to answer questions that the rest of the country is going to be waiting to answer tomorrow. And so what we try to understand with the unique cancer burden becomes an important incubator for innovation in the space of cancer prevention and ultimately survivorship. Next slide. So as an example of some of the work that we do in cancer prevention, I was hoping to share some tools that have been developed by key members of our cancer prevention research program. So the maps that you see are something that we call Scan 360, which helps us better appreciate the local cancer burden and where there may be unique opportunities to target our research or intervention to help a vulnerable population subgroup who's contributing to one of those unique cancers. We use this information to inform not only the research questions we ask, but also our outreach and education. Our goal is to work collaboratively with diverse communities to inform them about cancer and then to provide them opportunity to participate in our research so that we can learn more about what causes their undue burden of disease and, more importantly, to intervene upon it. You see the Game Changer, which is one of our hallmark interventions. It's a model that many NCI designated cancer centers throughout the country look to us to replicate. And on this vehicle, we offer different screenings for cancer prevention. including for HPV, which is the principal cause of cervical and many other cancers, screening for colorectal cancer, screening for hepatitis B and C, which are known to cause hepatocellular carcinoma or liver cancer, as well as screening for skin cancer. What's really wonderful about this vehicle is that it provides an opportunity for community interaction. It's a way that we can share our research with the community in a meaningful way. And it also becomes a gathering space for community members who are living with cancer to come together to learn from and through their collective experience. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Frank Penedo, who's going to speak to you a little bit more about cancer survivorship.
Thank you, Dr. Kobetz, and good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here this evening and say a few words about cancer survivorship and all the exciting work that's taking place at Sylvester. I would say that over the past 15 years, cancer survivorship has really matured into its own cancer discipline with a primary mission to address the complex and ever-changing needs and challenges of the growing population of cancer survivors. We are very fortunate at Sylvester in that survivorship is a priority of the Cancer Center with the optimal goal to optimize quality of life and patient outcomes across the survivorship continuum. Now, just a few words on what survivorship is. The NCI and other organizations refer to an individual as a survivor from the day of diagnosis, and survivorship care, in contrast, really refers to the post-treatment period through the balance of life, the care that's given to that patient through that period. And the period includes not only the patient, but also the caregivers, the family, and the community. So as it was alluded to earlier, over the past several decades, we have really seen an unprecedented growth in the number of cancer survivors across the United States and across the world. With currently about 16 million survivors, that number is expected to increase to about 26 million in 2040. The challenge that we have in our hands, however, is that the benefit that is gained by survival can be often offset by multiple challenges that our survivors face. Keeping in mind also that about 65% of all cancer survivors are over the age of 65, which of course, to some extent, older age comes with comorbidities and other chronic conditions that can be debilitating and impact quality of life. But more specific to survivorship, we know that patients after treatment can experience chronic and debilitating symptoms long after treatment. We know that to some extent care can be fragmented. Survivorship involves multiple disciplines talking to each other that often have not had a history of working with one another, like cancer rehabilitation, working with nutrition, working with exercise science. We also know that we have an impending shortage coming up of not only primary care providers, but also oncologists. So we need to find ways of how do we optimize the care of the cancer survivor so that the oncologists can devote their time to oncology care and preventing recurrences, secondary cancers, and other medical issues. There have been several influential reports published by the National Academy of Sciences and other organizations that have also called attention to the fact that we as a field haven't done a great job at addressing the emotional, physical, and social needs of survivors. And to complicate matters a little bit more, reimbursement is an issue. A lot of the services that we provide our survivors are not reimbursed by insurance. Next slide, please. So here at Sylvester, how do we bring it all together? So we gather a lot of our evidence from the research base that's available, that has been published over the past 15 to 20 years in the space of cancer survivorship and how to help patients and their families and caregivers adjust. We, of course, work very closely with our patients and our community to gather input on how do we implement these programs in a way that's sensitive and acceptable to our community. And of course, as part of our NCI designation, we have our Cancer Control Research Program, which itself creates research that is translated into clinical services. So bringing all these components together, we have a survivorship program here at Sylvester that is truly interdisciplinary, represented by multiple disciplines from various departments and divisions across the university, all with the optimal goal to provide evidence-based, patient-centered survivorship care. Here are just a few examples of some of the programs that we have. We offer our cancer survivors survivorship care plans, which is a comprehensive summary of their care and follow-up guidelines so that they have in one document an organized manner of planning their follow-up and looking at what are the next steps in their care. We have a program called My Wellness Check, which is being rolled out through the system now. And My Wellness Check addresses the assessment of patient-reported outcomes, symptoms like depression, anxiety, fatigue, and pain, so that we can identify patients who are in need of being referred to appropriate services to manage those symptoms. And those assessments are not only delivered through the patient portal, but they reside, or the scores reside, in the patient records so that the providers can have access to those assessments. We have initiated multidisciplinary survivorship clinics. These clinics are provide a one-stop shop, if you will, for the patient who's meeting with an oncologist, so that that patient is aware of other services that may be of benefit to them, whether it's nutrition services or psychosocial services. And finally, we have a variety of community and educational events and workshops, from provider learning series to raise awareness about cancer survivorship, and workshops that are delivered at the community to inform the community about managing the cancer survivorship experience. So with that, I would have the privilege of passing on the rest of the presentation to Dr. Carmen Calfa, our Medical Director for Survivorship.
So much, Dr. Penedo, and everybody. I'm really delighted to be here tonight. I was just listening to all these presentations, and the team we have at Sylvester is really a team I would just always be and want to be with. And it does take a village to make it happen, and together with you all, we are that village. It's really nice to see how we identify not only the best treatments for our patients, methods of prevention, but also once the patient is treated for cancer, to really look back and see what has the cancer done to that patient, what has the cancer done to that family, and how we can bring it back together in a way that is meaningful, in a way that the quality of life that they have is really what they want it to be. So I'm a breast medical oncologist. I'm privileged to have almost half of the women survivors in that big graph that you saw growing by the day being represented by women or men with breast cancer. In men, the majority of them are survivors of prostate cancers, but all the cancers are represented after that, with lung cancer, melanoma, skin cancer, and others being there. At Sylvester, we have the privilege to be a tertiary center and have representation for all cancer types. So as Dr. Penedo illustrated, the survivorship, it's a discipline on its own. We look at every patient that comes to our door and their families, and we treat them with curative intent or with palliative intent. And from the completion of their active treatment, then we look to see what interventions and prevention and surveillance they need, and how can we coordinate their care the best way possible to include the rest of their physicians involved in their care. So these are the essential components of survivorship care. When somebody is treated with a curative intent for cancer, then you look to see what prevention strategies you can employ to really help them not to have a recurrence of the cancer they're diagnosed, but also to minimize the risk of other cancers. And I know everybody, once they're diagnosed, everybody feels like they've done something wrong and they want to change. They want to do something different. And helping and having the patient become a team with the physician, it's really essential in really making sure that they benefit from all the prevention for the primary and the secondary prevention. Those patients need surveillance for other cancers. If a patient with breast cancer had kept her breast, she's going to continue to have surveillance to see if another breast cancer happens now that she's at high risk for having that. In addition to that, she will have surveillance for a colon cancer and skin cancer. And depending if she has a genetic mutation or not, she would be identified as a high risk for different cancer types. We do have those high risk programs where we offer individualized surveillance for our patients and their family members. Then it comes the intervention. And, you know, we call survivorship the gift that keeps on giving, because the truth is somehow it affects from head to toe every part of their body and their minds. And sometimes you see a tiny little cancer that causes so much anxiety and disrupts the lives in so many ways. And sometimes you see a very young patient that she hasn't had family yet, she hasn't completed her education or career. And even though the cancer potentially could be small, the trouble that brings on in that person's life is significant and is large. So we're really trying to develop the interventions and make them for every patient the way that they need. And that's where the precise care comes into play. Dr. Nimer said initially, it's not a size fits all. It's really individualized and personalized care that we offer for patients and for their caregivers. And then the coordination. Dr. Nimer and Dr. Penedo, and we all know that there is a shortage of primary care physicians. Many patients come running and they say, well, I can't get an appointment for several months. Can you just help me with all these things? We're trying to develop not only a solution to that immediate situation that we have, but also a solution that we can implement. And we can help our entire community to really benefit from having this coordinated care where the patient receives the cancer treatment at the cancer center, but then from there on, there is a nice coordination and the patient feels like he's well taken care of, not only by the physicians at Sylvester, but the physicians in the community as well. Next slide, please. I just made this little drawing here, and it's a unisex person or a figure that shows that breast cancer can affect men or women, and any other cancer can affect anybody regardless of their age, regardless of their socioeconomic status, regardless of their color. So look at how much the cancer treatment can do to somebody. From the hair loss, really, if you look at, it's really from head to toe. So from the hair loss, the cognitive impairment, it can affect their mood, it can cause depression, anxiety, PTSD. It can cause cardiotoxicity, meaning that it can damage the heart with the treatments that we deliver, radiation or chemotherapy. It can cause secondary cancer or increased risk for leukemia just from some chemotherapies that we give. It can cause infertility or sexual dysfunction, joint pain, osteoporosis. It can cause pain, peripheral neuropathy, GI symptoms, chronic fatigue, weight gain, hot flushes. And then obviously it affects the career planning, the family, and it has financial toxicity, which is now described, and it has a significant impact on patients. So this is just to show you that all these things come along with the cancer and the cancer treatment. And as it was said before, many of these interventions are actually not reimbursed. And we have the privilege at the Sylvester Cancer Center to really have all of you helping us to carry on our efforts to really create a survivorship that changes the people that were treated for cancer lives, and it brings their lives back together. Next slide. This just shows you all the things that I showed you in the previous slide that can affect the cancer survivor. They are matched with a discipline, and we are so privileged to be able to put together this circle of friends, you want to call them, but this circle of experts and expertise that are all built around our survivors and their families. And when you follow that circle, you're going to see that every damage that I mentioned to you in the previous one has now a corresponding specialty that is really focused on making that intervention as research-based, as evidence-based, as successful as it can be. And you know, many of these services are, again, not reimbursed, but through philanthropy and through efforts that we all are doing every day, we're really able to provide every patient that comes to our door. And I'm really proud to say that regardless of their ability to pay, they're all able to see a nutritionist, an exercise physiologist, to be able to be counseled for infertility or sexual dysfunction, intimacy. You see the rest of it is there, psychology, psychiatry, the geriatric oncology for those that are older age that have limited reserve, and the journey of cancer becomes even more difficult. So all these services are possible because of, you know, a great vision and a great leadership, and I'm grateful for everybody at Sylvester, but also a significant partnership that we have with the community. And I'm really grateful for everyone that is helping us in this journey. And thank you so much for having us tonight. Tony, I think we're back at you and we're ready for questions.
Thank you, Dr. Calfa. As you can see, this is a remarkable group of doctors, so much passion, so much caring. Let's get to the questions. Dr. Kobetz, we're going to lead it off with you. What is the relationship between cancer prevention and cancer survivorship?
Tony, that's such a great question. And whoever asked that in the audience is incredibly astute. So at the Sylvester Comprehensive Cancer Center, we like to think about cancer along a continuum from prevention to survivorship. And that's why we paired prevention and survivorship together tonight in this In the Know, because we want the community to appreciate and understand that we're working not only to prevent cancer, to come up with optimal strategies for early detection, treatments with less side effects and better outcomes, as well as survivorship for those who are navigating the complexity of a cancer diagnosis and the beyond. And it's really my privilege to work collaboratively with Frank and Carmen and many others in this space to build a really robust interdisciplinary program that draws on the scientific expertise that's required to study cancer from this long view lens.
Thank
The
you.
other thing I would say is that one of the programs within cancer survivorship, and I think both Carmen and Frank touched upon this, is also the prevention needs specific to people who have experienced cancer. And making sure that somebody who has had a cancer diagnosis adheres to certain guidelines and other evidence-based practices that we know reduce the likelihood of future recurrence.
Thank you, Dr. Kobetz. Dr. Nimer, this question's for you, and actually it's a two-part question. How do we get ahead of cancer? And are there any tests or lab work that can be done during an annual physical exam to help detect cancer early on?
Thank you, Tony. First of all, the early diagnosis of a number of cancers is possible. The American Cancer Society has guidelines for screening for prostate cancer. Women undergo mammography to screen for breast cancer. And you may have heard that there's a lot of efforts right now to be able to diagnose cancer early based on blood tests, but those are not really possible at the moment. So colon cancer screening with colonoscopy and studies that look at the stools for blood or for mutations, prostate cancer, lung cancer screening for people who have smoked. These are all things that need to be done. Skin cancer screening, and of course, taking a good family history to know whether there's some specific cancers that may run in the family that would need to be screened early. We understand some of the earliest forms of cancer. For instance, polyps. A small polyp over time can develop into colon cancer, but if removed early, it prevents colon cancer from occurring. And so these are the things that we need to be aware of. Dr. Calfa also mentioned if you've had a cancer, you need to be screened for a recurrence. And lastly, I don't want to forget the Pap smear, which has been absolutely transformative in terms of preventing cervical cancer.
Dr. Nimer, thank you so much. Dr. Calfa, this is a multi-part question for you as well, and it's about options for staying cancer-free. Would it be diet? What are the best options? Would it be more antioxidants? Would it be less sugar? How would you answer that?
Thank you for that question, for this question. I think it's a multiple part answer, and I'm just gonna go to the ones I think are most important to have somebody stay cancer-free. The earlier the diagnosis, the higher the chances of remaining cancer-free. But we also have very good treatment options, not only standard care options, but clinical trial available that increase the chance of somebody staying cancer-free. And I want to take this opportunity to mention the fact that for a triple negative, which are highly aggressive, and if they return, the prognosis is worse than the rest of the cancers, we do have a vaccine trial, and many people are really interested to have their immune system help in the fight against the cancer returning. So making sure that you're in a place where you have the best treatment where surgery makes sure that removes the cancer with clean margins, where you don't have too many but not too few lymph nodes removed, where radiation is delivered the best way with the best equipment. Those are all essentials for having somebody stay cancer-free, because the recurrences can happen locally or distantly, but they do depend on the initial treatment, and that initial treatment has to be done right. And I'm just encouraging patients to really always look to make sure that everything that they do makes sense. And if they need to have a first opinion in an academic center, we are here for them. If they need to have a second opinion, we're here for them. That's in terms of treatment. Then the conventional treatment can be paired up or can be followed by other research options. And we have immunotherapy for the breast cancer, and we have many other clinical trials for different cancer types. So that also increases the chance of somebody staying cancer-free. In terms of lifestyle and the things that people have control over and they want to do something, I have a lot of patients that come in the next day, they say, I change everything I'm doing right now, right here, right today. And there's one thing that many people are not even aware of, and potentially it's really easy to change, is the amount of alcohol people have in their daily lives. And I studied when the alcohol was stated to be a carcinogen, and American Cancer Society of Oncology made a statement that there is really no safe amount. We came to really make a recommendation for anywhere, the lowest amount of alcohol that one can have. That's probably the best recommendation. But I did make the recommendation for my patients, if they want to have a glass of wine or if they want to have 6 of them, they can just buy smaller glasses and they can just go with that and just have less and less. Smoking needs to be cut off from somebody's life. And then the 2 main things, especially in breast cancer, but there are many other cancers that benefit from the same thing. 12 cancers are linked to obesity. And obesity is one thing that is such prevalent in the United States. And we do so much work to really improve the awareness of how dangerous that obesity is. But it's also something that you have control over. And there is exercise that we offer through Sylvester. Even in the pandemic time, we're able to offer exercise physiology remotely. And there's dietitian that patients can see, and they can learn what to eat and what not to eat, and really how to regain their best weight that they can have. So in terms of antioxidants, I wish I could say there's a pill we could go have it and it's going to take care of it. But unfortunately, the supplements are really not FDA regulated, and we really don't recommend them. When it comes to antioxidants from fruits and vegetables, they are great and they should be part of our diet. And we should be replacing every bad food with really nice fruits and vegetables that contain a lot of natural antioxidants. In terms of sugar, I do allow my patients and many people I talk to, I say, you can have the sugar, that a little sugar here and there, nothing extreme is what I ever recommend. However, if you pair that with watching your weight and make sure that sugar doesn't translate into an increased weight, obesity, increased inflammation and all that, then it's okay to have a little sugar here and there. Sugar doesn't really feed cancer in that sense that if you put a drop of sugar in your mouth, it's going to go and feed and make the cancer grow. I hope that answers the question, but it's good to be in control, and we have control over what we eat and what we do, and the place that we choose to have our care in, and the doctors that we choose to have in our team.
Dr. Calfa, thank you. I love the smaller glasses idea. That it's a brilliant idea. Something that simple can make such a huge difference.
Yeah.
Dr. Penedo, it's nice to see you again, sir. You did such a beautiful job explaining what survivorship is. The question we have here is, when is a cancer patient considered a survivor?
So that's a really good question, Tony. And we do receive a lot of comments from our patients of how is somebody considered a survivor when they've just been diagnosed with cancer? Well, the answer is that the NCI, American Cancer Society, and other organizations really view an individual as a survivor from the day of diagnosis. The rationale behind that is that the individual is alive and they're living with a cancer that is about to be treated. But behind that story, a lot of the emphasis on coining that survivorship term from the beginning was really driven by the fact that we were seeing patterns through clinical experiences, through the research, that patients received a lot of attention during the diagnostic and the treatment workup period, and rightfully so. You want to get the optimal treatment, you want to get your best medical care available, But what was happening was that right after that primary treatment period, the patients were then sent off back to their daily lives. So individuals had to be reintegrated into work, family roles, social roles, and there was not a lot of attention being paid to the consequences of treatment, like treatment-related side effects. Now we know a lot better. We know, for example, that fatigue, sleep disturbance, even pain sensitivity can be a very persistent and debilitating symptom that can last 5 to 10 years after treatment. Emotional concerns are also very persistent. For example, fear of recurrence, even for individuals who have been treated for a highly survivable cancer, which was detected at a very early stage, we find that they experience significant emotions associated with the fear of recurrence. So it's a long-winded answer of why do we say somebody's a survivor at the day of diagnosis, but it's because we want to highlight the fact that this is a lifelong experience for them, and that there are going to be services available to them after all that attention that they're getting to the primary diagnostic and treatment phase.
Thank you, Doctor. Dr. Kobetz, I am in remission. My question is, will I always be considered immunocompromised? And will my COVID vaccine efficacy be compromised?
So I'm actually going to defer to my colleague Carmen Calfa, given that she is a medical doctor and I think better suited to answer this question than me as a scientist.
Okay, well, thank you, Dr. Kobetz. And I will say that, for those survivors that have received treatment with a curative intent. So remember what Dr. Penedo said about survivor, right? So the day of diagnosis. And I used to joke even before that definition was really implemented. And I used to say, if you survive the day of the diagnosis, you're a survivor, because it's come right there from nowhere at you. But those that receive treatment in the curative setting, they regain their immune competent status, some sooner than later, depending on the treatment they receive. Those survivors that are the chronic survivors, the permanent survivors, that they live with cancer and they receive either cytotoxic chemotherapy throughout their cancer journey or different treatments, their immune competence status is compromised. So for those that have received treatment in the curative setting, and I think the question that was addressed to Dr. Kobetz was for that, your immune system will recover anywhere probably around 6 months after completion of treatment. We really don't have a lot of data to really, Dr. Nimer can add if he knows specifics about, especially in the hematological malignancies. But for breast cancer, usually we look at 6 months post-completion of either chemotherapy or radiation. And from there on, we consider that they're immunocompetent. Even though we know that some patients are immunocompromised and they are living with cancer or receiving curative intent chemotherapy right now, the recommendation is still to receive the COVID vaccine. And even though they may not be building up such a robust immune response as if they were immunocompetent, the recommendation is still to receive the 2 vaccines. We know that one is not enough, especially in that patient population. But the 2 vaccines, the first and the booster, was able to mount an immune response that was felt to be significant and protective for those patients. So I hope this answers the question.
Dr. Calfa, that was great. Dr. Kobetz, we'll go back to you now. What are the key priorities for Sylvester cancer prevention in the future?
So the key priorities are constantly evolving because we are always working collaboratively with our community and also data that helps us understand what the most prevalent cancers are locally so that we can organize our efforts to be locally responsive. I think that some of our key priorities will be really trying to move the dial on new technologies that are lower cost, that don't require engagement with the formal healthcare system, and really circumvent structural, access, cultural, and other barriers that preclude all individuals from engaging in routine prevention. One of the primary foci of Sylvester is health equity. And this idea that through our research and the quality of our clinical care, that we can be part of the tide that rises all ships. one of our strategic areas of emphasis is not just to reduce the burden of cancer for everyone, but to ensure that everyone includes the most vulnerable. And so in my role, focusing on population science and cancer disparity, we will continue to try to move the dial on equity and to ensure that our programs are maximally inclusive for the diverse communities that we serve.
Thank you, Dr. Kobetz. Dr. Penedo, does participating in the survivorship care program reduce the care and the attention that you receive from your oncologist or primary cancer care provider?
Not at all. In fact, one of the major goals of having these survivorship services available to our patients is to ease and free up the time of oncologists so that they can focus on the medical care of the patient. We don't want Dr. Calfa to be spending time working through helping a patient get to the right resources to deal with anxiety or to get transportation or to deal with some barriers that the patient may be facing relative to adhering to a treatment. Let's say we want Dr. Calfa to spend her time working with the patient in their medical care, optimizing the care they're receiving. So cancer survivorship is really complementary to oncology care. In no way does it replace the care that the patient receives.
Great, doctor, thank you. Dr. Calfa, what is the suggested yearly screening program for a breast cancer survivor? Diagnostic mammogram, the ultrasound, or the mammogram only?
It's a great question. And the answer is depends. And depends on the patient, depends on her risk factors for developing a secondary breast cancer as she lives to be an old lady. So again, everything has to be personalized, and those assessments happen usually with oncologists. But I'll tell you a couple of things that we take into account when we make those recommendations. If a patient is very young when she's diagnosed, let's say she's 35-year-old and she has a genetic mutation, let's say maybe not the BRCA1 or the BRCA2 that usually patients choose to remove both breasts, have a bilateral mastectomy, and therefore don't need a mammogram. But let's say they have a less penetrant or a less highly increasing risk for breast cancer. We look at that, we look at the family history, we look at how many years she has had, and there is a calculation of what's the likelihood for her to have another cancer as she grows to be 75 or 80. And with that in mind, then we develop the screening that best fit that patient. In general, she would get an annual mammogram, and it's usually diagnostic. If the patient kept the breast after surgery and after a partial mastectomy, then she will receive a diagnostic mammogram, which is usually once a year. An ultrasound could come along with that if the patient is found to have dense breast. And if a risk to develop a secondary cancer as she lives to be older, it's felt to be greater than 20 or 25%, then an additional MRI, it's added to the mammogram and ultrasound sometimes, and they usually happen 6 months apart. So the surveillance for a patient with breast cancer can come anywhere from just a diagnostic mammogram yearly to a diagnostic mammogram plus ultrasound, or to a diagnostic mammogram and alternating with an MRI. Therefore, that patient will have images every 6 months instead of having it once a year. So that's where these discussions are taking place with the patient face to face. And then once we identify the model that best fits her, we communicate with the primary care physician, and we usually take care of the patients.
Thank you, doctor. Dr. Kobetz, what are some of the prevention techniques that Sylvester is employing in the community? I know you mentioned the mobile unit, but are there others?
So the mobile unit is actually prevention on wheels. It is part of Sylvester's commitment to be out in the community and to be a partner in closing gaps in cancer education and prevention opportunity for the community at large, but particularly those who may not have any other chance to participate in prevention and wellness. So as an example, the vehicle offers something called fecal immunochemical testing for colorectal cancer. This is a stool-based test that somebody does in the privacy of their own home, and then they bring the specimen back to us, and we process it in the lab to see if there's any indication of colorectal cancer that may require further diagnostic testing. If that were to happen, we then, on the vehicle, navigate that community member to care at Sylvester so that we can ensure that they get that diagnostic workup and that they are ideally diagnosed at an early, not late stage.
Thank you, Dr. Kobetz. Dr. Penedo, seeing a family member or a friend or yourself going through a cancer diagnosis and treatment is incredibly difficult. Are there beneficial things that we should all know before we find ourselves in that position?
Yeah, it's a really good and it's a very difficult question. Obviously, the cancer experience can be devastating not only to the patient, but also to families and friends of the individual. As a behavioral scientist and a clinical psychologist, I would say that the first thing that comes to mind is that that individual should realize that they're not alone. There are many services and resources available to assist family members and friends and caregivers through the cancer experience. Caregivers are an integral component, as we all know, of the cancer experience. And in fact, if we look at the research that has been conducted, the well-being of the caregiver is important, and it's important to also help the cancer patient navigate through treatment and the survivorship experience. I think it also has to be made clear to family members and friends that it is okay to seek help. Our human nature is to shift into being strong and being the strong figure to deal with the circumstances that surround cancer and its diagnosis and treatment. But when a family or friend gets diagnosed, we have to recognize that these family members and these friends also are going to need at some point some support, and services are available to the families and the caregivers because it has been recognized that it does take a toll on those individuals.
Yeah, it truly does. It does impact the entire family. Hey, Dr. Calfa, we just had this sent into us. How do you suggest decreasing obesity if you're on an AI that won't let you lose weight?
That's the question I deal with every day. And it's really, really hard. It's almost like I feel that we're mean. I'm causing all that weight gain. And then I'm saying, go lose the weight, right? So in many ways, we partner with the patients because we feel like the consequences of the treatments are causing this weight gain. And even though they want to lose it, it's really, really difficult. However, I can tell you that with the resources that we have, so we recommend that the patients see either an exercise specialist outside of Sylvester. If not, we have our own exercise physiologist that can sit with the patient, and now he can do it even remotely. And we can look at the pattern of physical exercise, and it's really, unless you maximize and you get up to 150 minutes to 300 minutes a week, moderate to high intensity. Everything below that needs to be optimized, right? So few people, when I really talk to them, are really doing the exercise that we're talking about. And then the other thing is really modifying the diet and the times that people eat and the quality of the food they eat. And I'm not saying it's simple, and it comes with expenses, financial expenses to eat the food that, it's less caloric and more nutrients there. So it's a difficult task, but if one looks at the obesity or the overweight as the next thing that they have to tackle. And I write prescriptions for that, just like I write prescriptions for the rest of the medication. I write the script. And sometimes people hire a trainer and they work with them. But I can tell you, if people follow the discussions and the recommendations that we have, and they team up with the right people in general, they're able to lose the weight. But it comes with a lot of hard work. We check to make sure that thyroid function is not an issue. We check to make sure that if they have other comorbidities, that are all addressed in a multidisciplinary fashion. I have patients that are referred to bariatric surgery, and they were having morbid obesity before they're diagnosed. So I knew that that's an issue. They're not going to be able to get out of it without the help that they need. But through all those interventions, not to say that everybody loses weight, but through all those interventions, many of the patients are able to make the strides that they need.
Dr. Calfa, we're going to keep you here because we just had this question submitted to us. How do you suggest, as we said, for that? But then we're going to ask, on top of that, why would someone in good shape with a good diet and no BRCA gene get cancer anyway?
Hi, so there is a name for it, the bad luck gene. So there is always a transformation, repair and damage. And somehow that repair escapes, through the immune system, and cancer finds a way to develop. Just in breast cancer, about 60% of the patients don't have a reason. It could be the epidemic of health, and you don't have a gene mutation, and you do the things that you think you did them all right, and you breastfed, and you had kids when you're young, and you did all those things, and cancer still happens. And unfortunately, 60% of the patients diagnosed with breast cancer cannot put their finger on what was the risk for developing. So just like anything in life, why people develop ALS, it's just sometimes things happen, but once they happen, then it's on you to find the right people and do the right thing to get your best shot at it.
Thank you. Dr. Kobetz, do you think doing preventative body scans to look for cancer will ever be a routine part of the annual physical?
No. I'm laughing because this is actually a pretty consistent conversation for me. One of the programs that we do in prevention and survivorship at Sylvester deals with firefighters who are at increased risk of developing and dying of cancer, given some unique occupational exposures that they experience as part of the work they do, saving us from burning buildings and burning cars. And there is a company in the firefighter space that does these annual full body scans, what they would say from neck to navel. And we've been trying to convince them through our partnership that this is really not a great strategy, because there's no evidence to substantiate that this kind of scanning leads to earlier detection of cancer. As Dr. Calfa was talking about, for breast cancer, we do a mammogram. The gold standard for colorectal cancer prevention is a colonoscopy. It's not a scan. And what we find in the firefighter community is that sometimes these scans lead to the identification of something that's not actually clinically significant, but the detection of it requires additional follow-up, which provokes a ton of anxiety that is often really hard to manage, as well as some uncertainty in results. So you could see something that may be in a place that can't be biopsied, and then you're waiting and wondering whether it's going to grow into anything that can be biopsied in a reasonable period of time. And so unless the technology changes, I think the answer is no. I think the goal is for us to identify better strategies for prevention by enhancing the tools that we have in our arsenal already, as well as thinking about molecular tools for prevention that help us understand our unique individual risk given our genetic history as well as our environmental exposures.
Thank you. Finally, Dr. Penedo, how are family members an important part of survivorship programs? I mean, I have to believe from everything I've seen and read that the family component is vital.
Absolutely, Tony. Cancer is often a couple's disease, a family disease. It doesn't really exist within a vacuum or only within one individual. Like I mentioned earlier, family members and caregivers are really critical to the care of the patients. And we know that the experience of the family and the caregivers impact our patients as well. And, I do a lot of work with prostate cancer survivors, and I rely a lot on their spouses and partners for their psychosocial adjustment. I see the importance that they can play in promoting a lot of the lifestyle factors that we have been mentioning today, from not only proper diet and physical activity, but also to following up with the physician. I do have to say that the caregiver and family psychosocial programs or survivorship programs are still in development. They're not as well developed as we would like, but there's quite a few initiatives that are in place, including family support groups that can be very beneficial to these individuals who play really a critical role in the adjustment of our patients.
Dr. Penedo, thank you. I don't know where this hour went because it just flew by. And we will promise to get to as many other questions and send you some answers out to everyone that asked some questions. Dr. Kobetz, we'd like to hear some final comments from you before we close up tonight.
I want to thank everybody for being here. First and foremost, my colleagues, Carmen and Frank, and my good friend, Tony, who is the facilitator of the year. Thanks to the audience for being here. We are so grateful for your interest in our prevention and survivorship work, and also to your commitment and partnership with Sylvester. Sylvester is your NCI designated cancer center. We look forward to continued conversations with you so that you can be in the know around the work that we're doing and the opportunities that we have collectively to prevent, fight, and ultimately cure cancer. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Kobetz, and thank you all for participating in tonight's In the Know. You know, what we witnessed and heard tonight from our extraordinary doctors is vitally important. That's obvious. But what it does is once again proves and shows how fortunate and truly blessed we all are to have these passionate and talented doctors and caregivers who continually strive to make our healthcare better. And not just the clinical side of our health, but our mental and emotional health, the holistic approach to keep us all healthy. How blessed are we? Please remember that a full recording of this program will be posted online. Look for that link in the coming days. And in a moment, you're going to see a survey about tonight's town hall on your screen. Please take a minute. And I promise you, I took the survey. It takes less than a minute because we really need your feedback, because what that does, it helps us understand your interest and it helps improve our program. As always, we wish you and your family good health. Stay safe. Please stay healthy. And remember, it's all about the you. Good night, everyone.